everyone. It's January 21st, 2014. January seems to be just flying by. It's Tuesday. It's Harp Tuesday. And in this episode, I thought I would take a look at Mozart's Sonata number 11. And this is just a very small arrangement that I did for a student. And I thought, hey, this might be a great thing for Harp Tuesday. So Mozart's Sonata number 11, the first movement is in the form of a theme and variation. So there's a theme, and then he does some various variations to it. So this arrangement takes the first half of that theme and simplifies it. So it's pretty basic. You should be seeing some links. There are public domain editions available of the sonata. So you might, if you like the piece, you might be interested in adding more notes to this. You might be interested in looking at the second half of the theme, because it's not too difficult, and you could certainly do a simplified arrangement or play the notes as written. But we're just going to talk about this little, 8-bar piece. And I should mention, by the way, that this piece, Mozart's Sonata number 11, this first movement, I have some fond memories of it because there's this wonderful recording of Maurice Sendak's short picture book called Kenny's Window, a recording of it with Tammy Grimes narrating, and one of the pieces of music that they play little piano pieces at various points, and one of them is this Sonata number 11. And I think it matches the book very well. So I remember that from being young, and it's got a very kind of melancholy, beautiful sound to it. So while it's very basic, there's some really interesting things to talk about here in terms of phrasing. And one of these days I do want to do a whole episode just talking about phrasing. But for now, let me play the piece. There we have it. So, very beautiful, very simple there. You can see its left hand is just doing these single notes. Etc. And the right hand, again, single notes. Basically just 2 and 1, and there's one little spot where we do 1, 2, 3. So again, it can be it's a great piece if you're just starting out, pretty basic. But, as I say, there's also a lot of things to think about just in terms of control and phrasing. So that you could just play it without paying too much attention to the sort of the overall structure. But let's talk about that. How one of the things to think about in terms of phrasing is thinking about that bigger line, so that we're going to play this first note and come off, but we're thinking that note is still connected. We're coming off again, but we're still kind of hearing this phrase going into the next bar. And it's only at the end of that fourth bar that we've kind of wound down a phrase, even though we can actually even think of this whole 8-bar piece as one big long phrase, where we have that sense of that first note is leading us into the very last note of the piece. So one of the sort of specific things to think about is then how we're treating this 16th note. And we don't want to linger over it. We don't want to, try to stretch it, I don't think. But at the same time, it can't be short. We can't ignore it. We don't want to go. So that it's one of the things, I guess, is just to really be aware of it and think about that sense, I guess, of it's unhurried and yet it's in rhythm. And same as getting from that C to that E. It's kind of hearing that space in between the notes, so that we have to kind of slow down time a little bit. And even though these notes are not that slow, we have to kind of hear that transition of that C to that E as having space between them, and as that C traveling into that E, so that so that it has this wonderful sort of floating, unrushed quality, while at the same time moving ahead. And there's almost a sense of a crescendo through there, right? We're going from a lower note and traveling towards a higher note, so we're not going to, do anything exaggerated, but there's almost that feeling of and this E moving into the next E, we still kind of have that subtle high point, and then we're backing off a little bit as we go down to the B, so that imagine if we were singing it or playing the violin or whatever, this first E, we might crescendo a little bit through that and then come down, so that, well, now we can't do that on the harp, but if we imagine that, that sort of helps us get us through that and phrase through that. And so again, here there's maybe a little sense of moving towards that D, crescendoing as we hold that D, backing off a little bit, building a little bit. And here, again with these 16th notes, they have to have that quality of not too fast and not too slow. So we don't want to stretch them and do anything really obvious, but they have to really be present. So really listening for them and really giving them the same importance that we're giving a quarter note. So that and here we are kind of thinking of backing down, but the one to be aware of is that D, which is on the weak position. It's the one that's easiest for us to lose. So making sure that that C is maybe a little bit softer than the D as we're coming down. We hear that D leading us into the C. So and then on that C, even though that's kind of the end of the phrase, it's not completely, so we're still thinking about, again, if you're singing, joining that C to this B, which leads us into this next 4-bar phrase. So, and maybe trying to sit on that B just a tiny bit, stretching it just a tiny bit. Not really stretching it at all, but just having it give that sense of, oh, here we are back to what we started with, this, so that we get probably, we've belt starting to come down. And you could obviously do some sort of big retard, but especially in the actual piece, and even in this, I think it's nicer to do something pretty subtle so that we're maybe stretching that last B just a little bit, but again, very, very subtle. Sorry. Some wrong notes in the left hand. Let me just try that again. So that, again, it's listening for those little spaces in between the notes, and there maybe just, it's that little bit of extra space, but hardly anything. Very, very subtle. So some fun things to work with something just as simple as that, right? So it's all about, we don't have a bunch of notes going on to cover anything up. It's all about just trying to get that as in control and doing exactly what you want with it. So something that can be just as a piece to learn and not even worrying too much about the phrasing if you're just starting, but if you're an experienced player, something like this can be a great exercise just in control and phrasing. So hopefully that was interesting, and I will see you in a couple weeks' time. Cheers.